Hello, Washington FBLA. With the new year, we are back with a new episode of CareerCast, providing members of the peak into their future as industry representatives and FBLA alumni share how their FBLA journey or business background shapes their careers and continues to grow their future. I am Samyukta Krishnan, and I am serving as your West Central Region Vice President this year. Joining us today is Kai Lincoln, an alumnus from our very own Washington FBLA. Before we get into our first question, Kai, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your FBLA journey?
Of course. So my name is Kai Lincoln. I'm currently a freshman at USC. I'm studying mechanical engineering and also pursuing a minor in public policy. I was a FBLA member for 3 years, starting in my sophomore year all the way throughout my senior year. I'm a former chapter president, state officer as the Southeast Region Vice President, and I was also a member of a national council. Throughout my time in FBLA, a lot of my emphasis was on creating informational resources for event preparation, and a lot of those still exist on the Washington FBLA website.
Perfect. So let's just get into it. Do you think you could share a little bit about how FBLA helped you figure out what you wanted to pursue in the future and how you're maybe still involved with the FBLA community?
Of course. So I think I was always pretty set on a career in STEM, especially like in the engineering realms. And a large reason for my involvement in FBLA was just because of a lack of STEM extracurriculars where I was from. But it's definitely not a decision I regret at all. FBLA was the thing that sparked my interest in combining like STEM knowledge and expertise with expertise in other fields. In my college applications, those centered a lot around my interest in the intersection of engineering and business. And although I have pivoted a little bit as of late into more the realm of public policy, I think those ideals still apply very heavily where fusing skills and like fields that might not at first seem like they go hand in hand is something that's really useful. So even if you don't necessarily envision a career in business specifically, I think FBLA is just one of those things that's universally useful. It can help you not only discover new passions, but also find ways to incorporate new ideas into your already existing passions. And even now to this day, I'm still in contact with many of my friends that I've made at the state and national level through FBLA, and I think that's another thing that I really treasure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I'm also more interested in the engineering side of things, but I do think FBLA does a lot for like networking skills. All of that is pretty important, regardless of the field you're going into. And I think also FBLA kind of really prepares you to kind of public speak a little bit better and kind of teaches you that you may be like working in one industry, but to have a startup or a business, you're still going to need that like business side of things apart from whatever your like technical expertise is. So yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. I know this might be a little bit of throwback, but what was your favorite FBLA event and how did that event teach you skills that you could use in your daily life?
Okay, so I think my favorite event changed a lot, like depending on when you asked it to me. But now that I'm here looking back, I think it was probably impromptu speaking. It's just one of those things that's like universally applicable. Even to this day, I'm told pretty often by my peers, my friends, and even some of my professors that I'm remarkably well spoken. And I think this is something that especially is noticeable in the engineering world, where a lot of people don't spend as much time honing those speaking skills instead of just like trying to like learn all of those like complex engineering topics and softwares that are very time consuming. But I think the time spent practicing your speaking skills and your like thinking skills, honestly, for impromptu speaking is something that's like indispensable. I utilize it every day in my classes and daily life. And even my current job here at USC as a tour guide in training, soon to be a proper tour guide. That was something that had a pretty rigorous interview process. And even the job itself it requires a lot of speaking skills that I definitely wouldn't have had if not for my interest in like competition in impromptu speaking while I was in FBLA. And in general, like impromptu speaking is one of those things where if you've done it, it makes every sort of presentation easier because if you can do a presentation without like much preparation. You're like on a really small time crunch and you have to think of all these things on the fly and then deliver that presentation. Then when you have the time to prepare and like the materials to prepare, everything becomes so much easier. So regardless of what kind of speaking you're doing, like impromptu speaking is one of those things that it prepares you both for those like day-to-day interactions and you're like when you're put on the spot, but also when you have time to prepare and you have those really big and important presentations coming up.
Yeah, I know for me, I've never done impromptu speaking like that event specifically, but public speaking and like generally like being able to kind of talk about things on the spot is pretty important because if you can't communicate your ideas, it's kind of hard to expect your product to get done the way you want it to. So yeah, I mean, definitely had a lot of experience with that. And I think FBLA has done a lot for me in that aspect. And I know that a lot of the freshmen in my school, I've been telling them about that too. I think that with public speaking, you can really learn like a lot of life skills too. So yeah. From high school to pursuing a major in mechanical engineering, what was a challenge you faced and how did FBLA skills, whether that was from being a state officer or from being a member, help you prepare to tackle that?
Mhm. Well, there are certainly like specific challenges that FPLA has helped me overcome. I feel like it's almost more notable in my case, at least, to talk about how not only have my experiences in FBLA helped me like overcome conflicts that have come my way, but they've also helped me avoid many that I see my peers like falling into. A lot of the engineers I see around me here at USC are incredibly brilliant and have so much experience in the STEM fields, but I can tell that a lot of them are still like actively honing many of their social and like networking skills. And although I'm still like in a lot of ways behind in some of those like STEM skills, I think my experience and like my social and networking skills in general place me ahead of the game in a lot of aspects. Like I can join a club. Currently, my main involvement here at USC is in the USC racing team, where we design and create a Formula style racing car. And despite the fact that I'm still very much in the learning phase of like trying to identify what all these parts do, and I'm surrounded by some freshmen who like already know this because they were working on a design team in their high school or they just like know a lot about cars. But despite the fact that I'm still learning, I think that my social networking skills, like I immediately identified like who I needed to like learn from, and I was able to very quickly grow close to a lot of the leadership in the club. And I think that's something that's really important and a lot of people neglect. And if I hadn't done that, I think I would have faced challenges in the future where despite how much I know about how much I do or don't know about these cars, if I'm not in the eye of the leadership, if I'm not someone that the team like recognizes as a active member, that would have had like challenges of its own. So even though I'm still learning, the leadership in my clubs like are very like they acknowledge that and they're very accommodating of it, mostly because I was able to go out of my way to identify them and really get close to them at the beginning. So that's something I attribute a lot to like that style of thinking. I attribute to FBLA, just finding those people that I need to get close to and just like networking is something that I'm always thinking about. And it's also helped ease a lot of the stress of job and like internship applications. I know those around me sometimes get really intimidated by those, but I not only have some experience with it from like state officer applications and national council applications I may have done in high school, but also just like I kind of know how it feels to go through it. So there's that hurdle overcome. And then also as someone who was on the elections team last year in my final year as a state officer, as a senior. I also have a little bit of a in on like the perspective of how does someone who's actually doing the interviewing, who's like sort of looking at these applicants, how do those people think as well? And that sort of really lowers a lot of the fears that I may have faced if not for these experiences of mine.
Yeah, I mean, those are some amazing points you just made. I mean, if you can't advocate for yourself and like put yourself in a position where you can actually like find the right resources, then I think it's overall going to be harder for people to navigate their way. And I'm so glad that you figured that out. And I think that all the people listening will kind of be able to learn that from you. And also, as far as like the state office team, I think that being able to apply for state office, whether you get it or not, itself is pretty big opportunity. Getting that interview experience, I think I know I learned a lot from just the interview itself, and then kind of going on from the background, I can kind of understand like how things work, how to network, how to get myself to get my point across properly. I think that people would like to hear more about maybe your state office experience and like your biggest growth points from there.
Yeah, I think I learned a lot from being in leadership, not just at the state level, but also like as a national council member and even as a chapter president and a chapter officer. Like not only has it taught me to lead like group projects, something I still do from time to time here at USC with like engineering projects, where I might have to go out of my way to make sure that we're actually going to meet at the beginning of like the project deadline instead of like sort of waiting and procrastinating there because a lot of the pitfalls I see people falling into, especially at like the college level at the beginning, is a lot of people don't really know how to navigate those group projects that are pretty like lengthy, where you're given like a whole month and this all the project guidelines, but not as much like hand holding as you might have in high school. And so being able to step up and lead those group projects when necessary is something that I attribute largely to my leadership experience in FBLA. And even though I don't hold leadership roles in any of my extracurriculars here yet, one of the really important benefits, I think, of having served in like rigorous leadership roles is you learn how those people in leadership think and what they want from their members and what they're willing to provide for their members. And that's something that I don't think a lot of people acknowledge as an important like perspective, but I think it really is. Once you've been there, whatever group you are in, you can look at the leadership of that group and be like, I know what kind of things you're thinking, what you want to accomplish, how you plan to accomplish it. And not only does it allow me to help them more, but in doing so, it also puts me more in their eye as like a potential future leader in whatever group it is. And in general, it's just really helpful to be able, not just to them, but also to yourself, to be able to understand the perspective of any leaders in any groups you're in. And also, like I mentioned earlier, since I was in the elections committee for the Washington State officers, last year, as someone who has administered interviews and read applications, I know what things are really, really common and what things I should avoid, and what things will really make me stand out as an applicant in any group that I'm applying to.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think you put that really well. It's important to kind of push yourself to be in those leadership roles because it definitely does give you kind of view into what you need to change and what you can make better about the way you contribute to groups and the way you go about completing your activities. I think, yeah, that's definitely important. And that's why I think we love encouraging people, whether they're first years or like returning members, to kind of run for state office, whether that's like they're not too sure about if they want to yet, maybe consider looking into that because I definitely think it is like not just state office, but national council. They're all like once in a lifetime opportunities. And I think those are really important experiences to have. So, finally, what advice would you give to current FBLA members and not just those who are new, but also people who are returning members? And do you have any advice for those who are thinking about running for state office? I know we were just talking about this. So,
For sure. So for members in general, I have to say, like, just make the most of it while you're there. I think that's a pretty common piece of advice, but as someone who just left the high school environment and is transitioning into college life and in the future careers as well, I think high school, a lot of the times it feels very high stakes, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not, it's important, but there's not much that you can lose. And so it's a very low stakes way to learn some skills that are really, really valuable for your future. So like there's no really big way to fail in high school, no matter what you do. Like you run for state office and you lose, that's not big, that's not that big of a deal. You're still learning things, you're still picking up these valuable skills that will benefit you more in college and in your careers when the stakes are much higher. And then also just like elaborating on that, pursue opportunities beyond just the FBLA events. Obviously, the FBLA events are really useful and allow you to like dive into whatever skills you're interested in. But in my case, I strongly believe I learned the most through leadership, and it doesn't really matter what level that leadership is. I learned just as much from my job as a chapter officer and as a chapter president than I did as a state officer and a national council member. Like I learned different skills from all of them for sure, but all of those skills were valuable. So whatever opportunities you see around you, just go for them. I think leadership in any shape or form is really admirable and just the greatest learning opportunity possible. And finally, my last piece of general advice, I suppose, is just make as many friends as you can and try to keep in touch with them because not only is that like an amazing it's great to have a bunch of friends, obviously, but also just from a purely networking and perspective, like you never know which of the friends you make in FBLA will one day have this amazing startup that you might want to be a part of, or have this sort of expertise that you didn't necessarily have the chance to pursue. Because like I have a lot of amazing friends I made through FBLA, and they're pursuing all sorts of different fields from like business, obviously, but also computer science and engineering and medicine and law and all these different fields that I can't pursue all of them myself. So having these friends that are pursuing them, it's always a great way to like reach out and ask any questions that may come up, and also just sort of like have these connections across the country that will really last if you make sure to maintain them. I think that's a really important thing. And then for those interested in running for state office, I think my biggest piece of advice from my own campaign, as well as my role on the elections committee, is to run on ideas. So this can be like one massive idea or a bunch of really like smaller ones. But as long as they're like new ideas and member focused, I think that's something that really attracts the most attention. My favorite campaigns while I was looking and evaluating those campaigns on the elections committee were the ones that ran on ideas and really centered around something they wanted to bring to the table and bring to the entire state of Washington. And it was also the way that I won my state office campaign. My entire campaign, I didn't necessarily have a bunch of experience. I had 1 year as a chapter president, and besides that, I was like largely an FBLA newbie. But I was able to really leverage a lot of attention by talking exclusively about the thing that I cared about most. And in my case, that was offering new resources and innovative ways of presenting those resources to the state. And not only were a lot of students intrigued by that, but a lot of your ideas can capture the attention of advisors, which I think is just as important. Those advisors have seen many like candidates throughout their time, and the ones like just saying you have these accomplishments, sure, that's impressive, but they've seen a lot of people like that. But if you have a new idea that they've never heard of before, that's always going to be something that catches their eye and will really encourage them to bet on you, I guess. And so I think my biggest piece of advice if you're running for state office is come up with some ideas that you really care about, that are new, and that can really benefit the members of Washington FBLA.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a perfect way to put it. I know for me, that's how I ran too. I wanted to make sure I communicated my need for uniting my region. My region is pretty competitive. West Central is always, always competing really. So I think for me, it was more about uniting them. And so I put the idea of having a region council, and we've started a bunch of new initiatives this year. And I think that kind of making sure that you're letting your audience and the people who are like probably going to vote for you know that your heart and soul is in the job and you want to help them. I think kind of centering around your like main goals and ideas, I think is definitely important. And as for like what you were saying before, I definitely think taking that leap of faith is the best thing you'll do, whether you succeed or not. It's always going to be a learning opportunity. So I'm with you on that 100%. And there you have it. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kai. If those of you watching have any questions from today or have any other questions you would like to see answered by alumni or industry representatives, feel free to reach out to any of us on the state officer team. Make sure to follow at WAFBLA on Instagram and our Washington FBLA page on LinkedIn to stay updated on all of our future CareerCast episodes.